There have been many great speakers up to this day. Many had great power with word, many had great power with charisma, and one had great power through his reason. I'm talking today about Winston Churchill. So I'm giving this presentation on Winston Churchill's Their Finest Hour speech. First, I'm going to start with the historical context. The date was May 10th, 1940. Germany attacks Luxembourg, France, Holland, and Belgium. The BEF, which is the British Expeditionary Force, was those who was defending those countries. The main two sides of the wars, the Allies had more tanks, the Germans had more planes, which kind of evened out the two sides. And another thing is the Germans had an aggressive battle plan where they used more modern technology to help, such as radio, and the generals would actually go to the front line with their troops. This boosted morale. The Allies had a more defensive battle tactic, similar to World War I, and their generals were nowhere near the front line. They simply gave instructions. Soon the Allies formed the Maginot Line, which was a bunch of defensive forts set up along the France-Germany border, south of the Ardennes Forest. Germany used a tactic called blitzkrieging, which is where they would just send a bunch of tanks all at once. Doing this at the Maginot Line really caught the Allies off guard. The Germans were able to pass right through the supposedly impassable Ardennes Forest and right into France through the Maginot Line. After a few weeks, Germany had won several battles. They had captured Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Paris. All of these events up to this point caused Prime Minister of Great Britain, Winston Churchill, to make this their finest hour speech to the House of Commons to address the German military and how to stop them, now that Britain seemingly stands alone. The speaker, of course, is Winston Churchill, who was born in Oxfordshire, England in 1874. He gained much popularity while he was before he was in office, because he published books and documented his many campaigns in the war. Churchill was elected the British Prime Minister in 1940 after the resignation of Neville Chamberlain and held that spot until 1945. The location of the speech was the House of Commons in the United Kingdom, which is the lower house of Parliament in the UK. The audience was the members of the House of Commons and Parliament of the UK, which were those who needed to hear the speech in order to carry out what the speech was provoking. The purpose of the speech was to end the phony war, start the real war. What I mean by the phony war is it's a term used to describe Britain's involvement in the war before Churchill's speech. Churchill emphasizes when he says, "I recite them in order to explain why it was we did not have, as we could have had, between 12 and 14 British divisions fighting in the line in their great battle instead of only 3. Much of the speech's purpose was to catalogue the might of British armed forces. Churchill does this many times. He does it, in fact, when he says, starting with saying Britain has 12 to 14 divisions that could be fighting. Churchill also talks about the Navy and the advantage that there is by using the Navy. He even goes as far as talking about how the possibility of seaborne battles is in the favor of the Allies because 1. The Italians could help, 2. They are more prepared for sea battle than ever before, and 3. That they know of there were only 2 large ships that Germany had to worry about, and Italy was more than willing to help take over those ships. But the main purpose was to advance the war on Germany and end Germany's reign of terror, forcing them out of France and other allied nations. There was quite a few rhetorical problems for Churchill. Most of these were physical. Winston Churchill was a great writer, but he was not a great speaker. As a child, he developed a stuttering problem. Churchill actually took a lot of time on his speeches. He would rewrite them over and over and over again until he got them perfect, to exactly how he got it. Doing this so many times made him actually memorize them, so he didn't have to actually read off a piece of paper. It seemed he had too many ideas at times, and he could not get them all into one speech, or at least in a coherent, organized fashion. He would sometimes ramble on from one idea to the next, going off the course of his memorization of his speech. This sometimes caused a problem. Also, another problem is since he did memorize his speeches, is he had absolutely no spontaneity, and he didn't just say what came off his head if he had any new ideas. He also preferred to speak in a solitary manner and not in a public forum, which in itself is a rhetorical problem since many of his speeches were performed in a public forum. He did also enjoy doing many speeches over the radio. Now I'm going to talk about the speech itself. First, I'll start with the format. Churchill had great structure to his speech. He started with laying out all the events of the war so far, which kind of gave like a shock factor to people. He then moved into all the opportunities available to push Great Britain into the war even further, and ends with a possibility of a possible outcome of if Hitler did succeed in taking the island of Britain. Some rhetorical strategies that he used very many. As previously stated, Churchill used the memorization of his speeches to help him have a more smooth speech. This somewhat helped overcome his speech impediment in the idea that he memorized his speech so he knew what was coming next, so he was able to prepare himself to not stutter. Another strategy Churchill used that was very effective, yet not very obvious, was that of his target audience. Obviously, the empirical audience were members of the Parliament, who Churchill needed support from. The effective strategy through target audience was that of the United States and of the Germans themselves. Churchill knew that this information would eventually reach the ears of the Germans, so Churchill was very careful with what he said. He said something he wanted the Germans to hear to impose fear, and didn't say things that would give them an advantage in the war. Churchill also targeted the United States in the statement, but if we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, including all that we've known and cared for, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and perhaps more protracted by the lights of perverted science. He stated that the whole world, including the U.S., notice he did not state any other countries, he was specifically targeting the United States there. Above all, though, Churchill's greatest rhetorical strategy that he used was that he appealed to logos. Churchill was a great writer. His speeches, when viewed as a manuscript, look just like that, like he actually wrote it out for printing in possibly a magazine. He used this as his greatest strength, writing, to empower his speeches. The logical sounding of his speeches made him seem more intelligent, which he very well was. It also made people believe in him more, and it made them believe that he knew exactly what he was talking about. Some other rhetorical strategies that he used were God and devil terms. He referred to Hitler many times. This is obviously a time where this was very much a devil term. It is today, obviously still, and he referred to it many, many times in his speech. He also used God words like freedom, peace, and victory very, very often. Some other ones he used were anaphora or repetition, again repeating Hitler's name many times throughout his speech. He also reiterated many times that Britain does have the power to overcome Germany, for example. I recite them in order to explain why it is what we did not have, as we could have had, between 12 and 14 British divisions, fighting in the line in this great battle instead of only 3. And also, here is where we come to the Navy, and after all, we have a Navy. Some people seem to forget that we have a Navy. We must remind them. For the last 30 years, I have been concerned in discussions about the possibilities of overseas invasion, and I took the responsibility. An example where he used alliteration is, and after they had been so transported, they would have to be continually maintained with all the masses of munitions and supplies which are required to be continuous battle, as continuous battle will surely be. He used it many times in one sentence, multiple words starting with T, M, C, and B. This is an example of anadiplosis. In conclusion, Winston Churchill's Their Finest Hour speech is one that will be remembered for history. The main reason for this is the outcome. This speech has a direct correlation with the Allies defeating Germany and forcing them out of the Allied countries. This speech was not great in presentation, as in it was not a great oration, as many other speeches in later years. What made this speech special was how strongly Churchill felt about what he was speaking, what everything he was saying meant, and that what he was saying was all truly possible and attainable. Great Britain needed a leader who would take action against Hitler and Germany, and they got that in Winston Churchill. and this speech showed to the members of the House of Commons, members of the UK government, and any other members of the Allied nations that the Allies will overcome Germany and win this war. Thank you.